So we'll start reading. Okay. Who'll read? One of you.
Shall I read?
Oh yes, Yasmin, do that. Our mind works best. By the way, just to get the continuity, remember, he's saying that this problem of seeing the world as unreal or real, it is not dependent on the world's reality or unreality. It is the problem is with the mind, which is not seeing the reality because it is using defective instruments. If it uses the right instruments, it will see the reality. The reality is there, but you are not seeing it in the right way. That's what he has said in the previous one. That's the gist of what he said. So he is examining the mind and its capacity to see the reality, either partially or completely. That's what now, and we will read this. This is the main gist of what he's saying. The problem is not with reality of world. The problem is with your perception of the world. It is defective perception because you are using defective instruments. The mind is very, very defective and imperfect. But as it mounts, as consciousness rises, it becomes more and more perfect. Therefore, the solution to the unreality of the world or the reality is rise in consciousness. So, we read now. Yasmin, our mind works best.
Our mind works best and with a firm confidence when it is given a substance to work on, or at least to use as a basis for its operations, or when it can handle a cosmic force of which it has acquired the knowledge. It is sure of its steps when it has to deal with actualities. This rule of dealing with objectivized or discovered actualities and proceedings from them for creation is the reason of the enormous success of physical science. But here there is evidently no creation of illusion, no creation of non-existence in vacuo, and turning them into apparent actualities such as is attributed to the cosmic illusion. For mind can only create, no, create out of substance what is possible to the substance. It can only do with the force of nature what is in accordance with her reliable energies. It can only invent or discover what is already contained in the truth and potentiality of nature. On the other side, it receives inspirations for creation from within itself or from above. But these can only take form if they are truths of potential or potentials, not by the mind's own right of invention. For if the mind erects what is neither true nor potential, that cannot be created, cannot become actual in nature. Maya, on the contrary, if it creates on the basis of the reality, yes, it yet erects a superstructure which has nothing to do with the reality, is not true or potential in it. If it creates out of the substance of the reality, it makes out of it things that are not possible to it or in accordance with it, for it creates forms, and the reality is supposed to be a formless, incapable of form. It creates determinations, and the reality is supposed to be absolutely indeterminable.
Yeah, there you are. So, we'll do one thing. We will first see in short what he's saying in the paragraph. Then we'll go into details because the use of words in Sri is really of capital importance. So let's see what he's saying first in summary. Okay, so I'm reading out to you what I have summarized. The human mind works best when it is given a substance to work, a material, either wood or metal or clay, then it works very confidently. Or it can deal with a cosmic force of which it has some knowledge, for instance, sunlight. Okay, sunlight is now it's not a material thing, but it has got some knowledge, so now it knows how to deal with sunlight or anything which is in nature which is hidden. Okay, so this is the reason for the tremendous success of science, okay, because it deals with things, with material things, and also with things which it is discovered in nature. Yeah. So, but when the scientific mind is creating, it can create only from a given substance and the potentiality is inherent in that substance. So when it is creating and uses the substance, what is the capacity of the substance it can do? Not only science, but even man also learns how to use the potential of a substance. Very easy example, there is wood. Okay? And wood has got the potentiality of fire in it. Coal has got the potentiality of fire in it. But the primitive man did not know that. But the potentiality is there in coal and wood. And now man has learned to extract that potential and use it. Now that's the simplest example. But if you go to the metals, okay, take the scientist, okay, he now knows that uranium can produce energy. So now he has learned how to use it. That's what Sridhar is saying. When the scientific mind is creating it, it can create only from a given substance. As I said, coal, wood, or uranium. I'm just giving examples. And the potentiality is inherent in that substance. It cannot create anything that is already not inherent in it. That's the whole thing. Okay? It can't create something which is not potential in it. It cannot create, for instance, fire from clay. That's not possible. So it will create only that which is possible. Pots and pans are potentially possible in clay, and that it can do. But it cannot create fire out of it. Okay? It cannot create anything that is already not inherent in it. It will create only that which nature or the world conditions will allow it to create. Exactly. The things are readily available and nature will allow it to do it, then it can be done. But in the Mayavada theory, we have an absolute reality, totally featureless and indeterminable, which by the power of its Maya is creating absolute unrealities or illusions which are not to be found on the parent reality. So this is, Srimla doesn't agree with that. But this is the Mayavada theory. The Mayavada theory is saying that the Maya is producing things which are absolutely unreal, and the unreality does not. So this is the Mayavada theory. It is producing unreality. Maya is producing unreality. But Srimla is saying, does unreality exist in the Satchidananda? It does not. Therefore, it cannot. So therefore, we have to reject the Mayavada theory. That which is being produced is unreality, we can't accept because it is not there in the Satchidananda. So this is what he said. Now we go back to the beginning of each para in each sentence and see what he said. So, the mind can create only things which are potentially present in materials. Okay? The material can be subtle, the material can be also gross. Gross material we have already discussed. Okay? Coal, wood, and you can think of 100 other examples, but I'm just giving you examples to make it very clear. Coal, wood, and uranium. But what about sunlight? It is subtle. But now we know how to use it because we have knowledge of it. That's what I'm saying. The material can be gross, it can be subtle, it can be the subtlest. But subtlest, we have not learned how to use it. Science has not learned how to use it. But the spiritual man, the yogi, has to a certain extent the capacity to use that. Consciousness, he can use consciousness. Right? So, I am reading each sentence. Our mind works best and with a firm confidence when it is given a substance to work with, okay, to work upon. So substance, as I said, coal, or you can think of material. You can replace the word substance with material, but Srinath used the word substance because it can be material, it can be non-material also. Okay, sunlight is non-material, but now we know how to use sunlight. So substance to work on, or at least to use as a basis for its operations, or when it can handle a cosmic force. There you are. So cosmic force is sunlight or wind. Okay, it is subtler. But we know how to use it because obviously it has acquired the knowledge. Now we know that wind can be tapped. We know that running water can be tapped. We know that sunlight can be tapped for energy. It is sure of its steps when it has to deal with actualities. There is something which exists, that it knows how to. This rule of dealing with objectivized or discovered actualities, very interesting. Objectivized, again, coal, wood, or uranium. Discovered actualities, sunlight, running water, and wind. Discovered actualities. Okay? You have to discover it. So you see how interestingly he puts these words, and we have to understand exactly what he's saying. Proceeding from them for creation is the reason of the enormous success of physical science. But here, there is evidently no creation of illusions. When the scientist is creating materials, there is no illusion at all. No creation of non-existence in vacuo. In a vacuum. He is using in vacuum, Latin phrase he is using. Obviously, it means in a vacuum. No creation of non-existence in vacuum and turning them into apparent actualities, such as is attributed to the cosmic illusion. So, the difference between science and Mayavada is this, that science is creating something which is potentially present in the material he is using. But Mayavada is saying that unreality is being produced out of the ultimate substance, and that cannot be accepted because there is no unreality in the ultimate reality. So that's why it has to be rejected. So, but here there is evidently no creation of illusions, no creation of non-existence. What is here in science? Okay. But in science, there is evidently no creation of illusions, no creation of non-existence in vacuum, and turning them into apparent actualities, such is attributed to the cosmic illusion. For mind can only create out of substance what is possible to the substance. The capacity that is there already in it. I was seeing one video where now he is not living anymore, but he was a wonderful man. He was the president of the Ramakrishna Mission, and his name was he had my name, okay, Swami Ranganathan, and he was in Australia, and he was giving an example, and I had never thought of that, but he said, take a matchstick, there is fire in it. And human nature is like that. We see only the matchstick and we think that it is something without any potential. But the matchstick has got fire. You must know how to strike it and use it. So the fire, the divine fire that is there in a human being, you must know how to strike and light it. That is yoga, he was explaining. I thought it was a beautiful example. So, there's a video of him. He used to go all over the world and give talks. Ramakrishna Mission. Okay, so our mind can only create out of substance what is possible to the substance. It can do only with the force of nature what is in accordance with the realizable energies. I usually give that example also of the conception of Leonardo da Vinci for heavier than air flying machines. You remember? But it could not be done in 400 years earlier because nature was not going to allow it. Why? Because the data was lacking. And now data was not lacking. Now we know the laws of aerodynamics and we have materials which are light. We have plastic, we have aluminum which didn't exist at that time. So now they know how to do this. So nature will allow it now. So that's the reason why also the supramental was not possible earlier because nature would not allow it. You have to go step by step. You can't go from kindergarten to knowledge straight away. You have to go through all the intermediate steps. Then only nature will allow you. So that's what Shakti is saying. For mind can only create out of substance which is possible to the substance. It can do only with the force of nature what is in accordance with her realizable energies. It will, it can only invent or discover what is already contained in the truth and potentiality of nature. Again, he is using two words, the truth and potentiality. The truth of things is there inside everything, but the potentiality also has to be there. And if the potentiality is there, it can. On the other side, it is. Now he's talking about the mind, no? Human mind. On the other side, it receives inspirations for creation from within itself or from above. So he is talking of the science which uses materials outside itself, in the environment, in the what's called the circumconscious. But and there science is very successful. But when you are using materials inside yourself or above yourself, it's a yogi who is using the potentiality of the inside and the above, not science. But now science also is slowly discovering that. So very clear what he's saying. Huh? It receives inspirations for creation. What is it creating? It is creating potentiality. It is creating love. It is creating power. It is creating knowledge. Okay, that's what it is doing with these things, inside and above. Inside is the psychic being, and above is the self. So when you get that, knowledge is created, power is created, ananda is created. Okay. See how slowly he is going from the external, where physical things are possible, to the internal and the superconscious, where subtler things can be formed. So all this has to be given form, and it has to become manifested. It can only do with the force of nature what is in accordance with the realizable energies. It can invent or discover. Okay? Invent or discover. Again, you can see how there is a difference. Invention is a mobile is an invention, a TV is an invention. But discovering, you discover that energy is possible in sunlight, energy is possible in wind. That's what discover. There is a difference between discovery and invention. What is already contained in the truth and potentiality of nature. On the other side, it receives inspirations. Examples, it received, Einstein received inspirations, Newton received inspirations, our mathematician Ramanujan received inspirations for creation from within. He was creating mathematical formulae, or from above. So in all the three cases, most probably it was from above. I don't know about but obviously for Ramanujan, and also you can say for Einstein, it was from above, because they had the laws of science, they could able to, the laws of nature they could get. That can come only from on top. But these can take form if they are truths or sorry. It cannot be created. On the other side, it receives inspirations for creation from within itself or from above. So, always he is thinking of these four things. The external world, which is the circumconscious, the world below us, which is the subconscious, or even the inconscious, then that which is inside us is the intraconscious, and that which is above us is the superconscious. So all these have got potentialities. Even the inconscious has got a potentiality. That's the interesting part. Okay. That cannot be created, cannot become actual nature. Maya, on the contrary, now he is contrasting Maya and mind. Okay? Maya, on the contrary, if it creates on the basis of the reality, yet it erects a superstructure which has nothing to do with the reality. It is not true or potential in it. If it creates out of the substance of the reality, it makes out of it things that are not possible to it or in accordance with it. For it creates forms, and the reality is supposed to be formless, incapable of form. So the Satchidananda is featureless, formless, infinite, eternal. It has absolutely no possibility of creating unreality. It is totally real. It creates determinations, and the reality is supposed to be absolutely indeterminate. Now, Shem is discussing imagination. How imagination is a very, very powerful, um, it's a powerful element in man. Very powerful. The animal does not have imagination, but our imagination can become reality when we use it. We must know how to use our imagination. So let's read that. Yasmin read it. So now Rachanadi or Sumki or Shilpa. Any one of you read. But our mind has a faculty. Yeah, go ahead.
But our mind has the faculty of imagination. It can create and take as true and real its own mental structure. Here it might be thought is something analogous to the action of Maya. Our mental imagination is an instrument of ignorance. It is the resort or device or refuse of a limited capacity of knowledge, a limited capacity of effective action. Mind supplements these deficiencies by its power of imagination. It uses it to extract from things obvious and visible the things that are not obvious and visible. It undertakes to create its own figures of the possible and the impossible. It erects illusory actuals or draws figures of a conjectured or constructed truth of things that are not true to outer experience. That is at least the appearance of its operation, but in reality, it is the mind's way or one of its ways of summoning out of being its infinite possibilities, even of discovering or capturing the unknown possibilities of the infinite. But because it cannot do this with knowledge, it makes experimental constructions of truth and possibility and a yet unrealized actuality. As its power of receiving inspirations of truth is limited, it imagines, hypothesizes, questions whether this or that may not be truth. As its force to summon real potentials is narrow and restricted, it erects possibilities which it hopes to actualize or wishes it could actualize. At its, as its power to actualize is cramped and confined by the material world's oppositions, it figures subjective actualizations to satisfy its will of creation and delight of self presentation. But it is to be noted that through the imagination, it does receive a figure of truth, does summon possibilities which are afterwards realized, does often by its imagination exercise an effective pressure on the world's actualities. Imaginations that persist in the human mind, like the idea of travel in the air, end often in self fulfillment. Individual thought formations can actualize themselves if there is sufficient strength in the formation or in the mind that forms it. Imaginations can create their own potentiality, especially if they are supported in the collective mind and may in the long run draw on themselves the sanction of the cosmic will. In fact, all imaginations represent possibilities. Some are able one day to actualize in some form, perhaps a very different form of actuality. More are condemned to sterility because they do not enter into the figure or scheme of the present creation, do not come within the permitted potentiality of the individual, or do not accord with the collective or the generic principle, or are alien to the nature or destiny of the containing world existence.
Magnificent. The way he uses words and all the possibilities he discusses. His text is absolutely really unbelievable. We look at what he's saying carefully one by one. The power of expression in Swayambhu is unparalleled. Really fantastic. Okay, so let's see what he's saying. We have time. We have about 20 minutes, so we can finish this paragraph today. But our mind, okay, our mind is the mind as it is at present. It has got logic, but it has also got imagination. But that imagination is in the field of level 1. And level 1 is ignorance. We don't see the reality fully, we see it only half. But it's not absolute unreality. There is error and there is also knowledge in our mind. It's a halfway house. Okay? But our mind has the faculty of imagination, which is something that the animals don't have. Okay? We have the power of imagination. So it's already a big power, but it is defective. So Swami is giving you the truth of it and the defects of it. Okay? Imagination can create and take as true and real its own mental structures. Okay? Now this is a very interesting sentence what he's saying, because this is what happens in yoga. Okay? Sometimes it can create and take as true and real its own mental structures. And this in our Shastras is also pictured and symbolized by Trishanku, who wanted to go to heaven with his body. So it's a very interesting episode, and everybody told him it's not possible. But there was one Rishi, I forget the name, who said that, okay, I'll do it for you. And he took him, but he could not reach the highest. So a world was created in which he thought that that's the ultimate reality, and he was hanging there in the middle. That's why he is actually in limbo. What you use in English, you use the word in limbo, hanging between two things. Okay? So that was a mental structure. It was not the reality. So this is what happens also. Very often Swayambhu is telling sadhaks that what you create by the mind can be real, but it can also be not real. So you have to be very careful. So it can create and take as true, okay, and real its own mental structure. Because remember one thing, the mental structure is destructible. That's a very important thing. A mental structure is destructible because it is in the field of time and space. Anything that is in time and space can be created but also destroyed. Not also, it is bound to be destroyed at some point or other. Everything that is outside time and space need not be destroyed. So our mind is a faculty of imagination. It can create and take as true and real its own mental structures. A good example of this is, he has discussed this in Life Given Elsewhere. You think that you are the King of England and you live in that consciousness. Okay? When you are a madman, this can happen. And for you, it is absolutely real. Swayambhu uses this one only. He says the madman thinks that he is a king of the Tudors or the Plantagenets. Plantagenets were the line of kings in France. So he has used this image and he takes it to be true. So take as true and real in its own structure. Here it might be thought is something analogous, very, very similar to the action of Maya, because Maya is creating unrealities. So similarly, our imagination also, it can create unrealities. But can it create total unreality? Like Maya is creating total unreality? Is it like that? That's what is discussing here. Okay. Now, imagination can think of, as I said, a flying tiger or a mermaid. But if you analyze carefully, a flying tiger, flying exists and tigers exist. So you're only combining, you're not creating something that doesn't exist. Okay. So imagination can create things which don't exist now, but could exist in the future. That's what he is going to tell us. So let's read further. Here, it might be thought as something analogous to the action of Maya. It might be thought, you might think. In other words, it is not really similar. Imagination and Maya are quite two different things. Okay? Our mental imagination is an instrument of ignorance, not of knowledge. Because do you need imagination when you are in knowledge? You don't need imagination because you become the reality. That's the interesting part. So imagination is not there at the mental level, at the animal level. It is there at the mental level. And above the mind also, you don't need imagination because you are in the reality. So it's a midway point. Just like language, no? Language also is a midway point. The animals don't have language. Men have language. And the yogis don't need language. They can communicate directly without language. So there are so many. Each step, each world has got its own realities. And you can see how it goes higher and higher. It becomes subtler and subtler and more true. Okay? So this is what Shambhi is discussing. Our mental imagination is an instrument of ignorance. You have to stress of ignorance, okay, not of knowledge. It is the resort or device or refuge of a limited capacity of knowledge. Look at each word, it's a resort of knowledge. In other words, there is a possibility of knowledge in imagination. Or you can use it as an instrument, a device. Or it can be a refuge of a limited capacity. Okay. So there are three things here. He is using three words, and we have to see how interestingly he uses words. Resort. That means the what you are imagining is there inherent in imagination. What you are thinking of is in imagination. Or you can use it as a device. He is giving himself the example of air travel. Huh? So suppose at the time of Leonardo da Vinci 400 years ago, the capacity of flying in the air was there inherent in imagination resort. But then Leonardo da Vinci actually used it as an instrument. He used his imagination and made plans even and drew it on paper. So that's a device. He is using it as an instrument or refuge of a limited capacity of knowledge. Refuge. It is taking refuge in the mind is taking refuge in the imagination of a limited capacity of knowledge, a limited capacity for effective action. Mind supplements these deficiencies by its power of imagination. What doesn't exist, mind can supplement it by deficient. The deficiencies of the mind, it can replace by imagination. It uses it to extract from things obvious and visible the things that are not obvious and visible. It's very clear what he's saying. A flying tiger is not obvious, nor is it visible, but it can do that. The imagination can do that. It undertakes to create its own figures of the possible and the impossible. So it can do that. Where you give examples to yourself, it becomes very, very clear. There is disease is very common in man. Okay? So you imagination says I should be able to find a solution to it, and you find a solution. It can be a possible solution, or it can be an impossible solution because you may be able to discover the solution for one disease, but can you eliminate disease altogether at the lower level? That does not seem to be possible because that's a law, because it is defective. The level one in the ignorance, the law of imperfection is very, very clearly present there. So that's impossible to change it at our level. Okay, it's possible to change it in the supramental world, but at our level. Mind supplements these deficiencies by its power of imagination. It uses it to extract from things obvious and visible the things that are not obvious and visible. It undertakes to create its own figures of the possible and the impossible. It erects illusory actuals or draws figures of a conjecture or constructed truth of things that are not true to outer experience. Again, the example of the flying tiger is very obvious what it is. It erects illusory actuals. Flying is actual, tiger is actual, but a flying tiger is illusory. It erects illusory actuals or draws figures of a conjecture, imagine, guesswork, or constructed truth of things that are not true to outer experience. That is at least the appearance of its operation. So, it can create things in the mind which are not yet possible. That's what Sri saying. That seems to be its method of operation. Now, by examining further, is it really like that? But in reality, it is the mind's way or one of its ways of summoning out of being its infinite possibilities, even of discovering or capturing the unknown possibilities of the infinite. The infinite is infinite, therefore everything is possible in it. That's an interesting part. Okay? Everything is possible in it. Now, this certainly reminds me also of a very interesting thing, and I will mention that. It seems impossible, but the infinite is something that contains everything. Therefore, everything is possible. But it is possible only in time and space. It has subject to time and space. Nature has to allow it. Okay. It reminds, suddenly a thought came into my mind. Dilip Kumar Roy is asking Sri Aurobindo that when we are offering, I think it is here, when we are offering food to the divine, okay, we do on the altar, we put the picture in all our religious ceremonies, we do that. We put the food in front of the image, and afterwards it becomes consecrated and holy, and therefore we consume it. But can the divine come and really eat it up? Is that possible in the physical world? So Sri Aurobindo says it depends upon your faith and belief, and everything is theoretically possible. Nothing is impossible. It can become, it can be done. It depends. There is nothing that is absolutely impossible, but it is subject to time and space. Okay? So that's what he's mentioning here. The imagination is the mind's way or one of its ways of summoning out of being the infinite existence, its infinite possibilities, even of discovering or capturing the unknown possibilities of the infinite. Even those things which we don't know can one day become possible. But because it cannot do this with knowledge, mind has no full knowledge, it makes experimental constructions of truth and possibility and a yet unrealized actuality. Now, this is the truth of also morality. When in the physical world, the animal has no idea of morality, but when man comes in, he sees falsehood. So he thinks that with his imagination, there should be truth. So this is the birth of morality. He sees ugliness and he thinks of beauty. He sees cruelty, so he thinks of kindness. So this is what imagination can do to you. But because it cannot do this with knowledge, it makes experimental constructions of truth and possibility and a yet unrealized actuality. As its power of receiving inspirations of truth is limited, it imagines, hypothesizes, questions whether this or that may not be truths. You start thinking what is true and what is not true. As its force to summon real potentials is narrow and restricted, it erects possibilities which it hopes to actualize or wishes it could actualize. So Sri Aurobindo uses all. It hopes to actualize, or when there is no hope, it wishes it could actualize. As its power to actualize is cramped and confined by the material world's oppositions, it figures subjective actualizations to satisfy its will of creation. There is a will of creation, and imagination it uses to satisfy its will of creation, even when it can't. And delight of self-presentation. Now note that he brought in the idea of also delight. When you create, you get delight also. And that is absolutely fundamental. When you create, there is delight. And that's what the nature is doing all the time. Satchidananda is doing also, and nature also is going on creating and presenting to Purusha. Prakriti creates and presents to creation. Why? Because of delight of self-presentation. What is it presenting? It is presenting to itself. When you talk of delight of self-presentation, it's talking of the Ananda. it creates with its force and presents it to itself to enjoy. But it is to be noted that through the imagination, it does receive a figure of truth. So, figure of truth, not the complete truth, but the figure of truth. That means, again, we go back to the same example. Leonardo da Vinci had a figure of truth. He could not see it as a reality, but the possibility of flying in the air was, it's a figure of truth in the mind. But it becomes a truth in the physical world when the world conditions allow it. Exactly in the same way also, Ramanujam also could create mathematical formulas, which were figures of truth. And later on they found that yes, there is a truth in it. Figure of truth, not the truth itself. Does summon possibilities which are afterwards realized. Exactly in the, like he's saying, he is using himself the same image of the flying aircraft. Thus, often by its imagination, exercise an effective pressure on the world's actuality. That's another thing he's mentioning. Imagination puts pressure on nature to create what it has not yet created. Okay? So it's an interesting way of putting it. Imaginations that persist in the human mind go to the moon. It was only an idea at one time. It was impossible at one time, then it became a possibility, and actually it put so much pressure that it became a reality. Imaginations that persist in the human mind, like the idea of travel in the air, end often by self-fulfillment. All imaginations can end in often, so they're saying often end in self-fulfillment, but when the conditions in the world allow it. That's what he's saying in the next phrase. Individual thought formations can actualize themselves if there is sufficient strength in the formation. That means the more powerful your imagination, the more chance it has to realize itself. Or in the mind that forms it. Imaginations can create their own potentiality. Imagination can create their own potentiality, especially if they are supported in the collective mind. Individual mind is not enough. So, collective mind. That's the reason why Sri Aurobindo wanted 100 yogis in the ashram who could be at a higher level of consciousness that could help the supermind to descend. Individually, it's more difficult. Yet they did it. So, represent possibilities. In fact, all imaginations represent, where is it gone? In fact, all imaginations represent possibilities. Some are able one day to actualize in some form, perhaps in very different form of actuality. Yeah, somebody was trying to discover something, and by chance he discovered penicillin. It was by chance discovery. More are condemned to sterility. They don't find, they don't become actual because they do not enter into the figure or scheme of the present creation. So when he's talking of the figure or scheme of present creation, he means the world conditions don't allow it. Do not come within the permitted potentiality of the individual or do not accord with the collective or the generic principle. Generic principle is the power to create forms, generate forms. So generic principle is that, okay, that which is possible to generate realities or are alien to the nature or destiny of the containing world existence. That comes to the end, and I have crossed the time limit by 1 minute. So we stop here too. Sumki, you will have to note down our next is thus the mind's imaginations.
Yes.
Okay, a very interesting discussion, and we went into great detail to see what he's saying. Right? Okay. Au revoir, everybody.
Blessing